From Hollywood, it's time now for Edmund O'Brien as...
Johnny Dollar.
Mrs. French speaking. Who is this?
Oh, I'm sorry for my explosive greeting, Mrs. French. It's a habit I've gotten into. This is Mr. Dollar from the insurance company.
Oh, yes, I received the message that you'd called. But I don't think I understand you're coming to Chicago.
Well, I guess they haven't got around to writing you about it. They sent me here to talk to you about your son.
I see.
And then if we decide there are grounds for your fears about him, they've given me authority to go out to the Malay states and investigate the situation.
Oh, that's very nice of them. I am afraid for Edward.
I'll come out to see you about 1:30 then, Mrs. French.
Edmund O'Brien in a transcribed adventure of the man with the action-packed expense account. America's fabulous freelance insurance investigator.
Yours truly, Johnny Dollar. Expense account submitted by Special Investigator Johnny Dollar to Home Office Tri-State Insurance Group, Hartford, Connecticut. The following is an accounting of expenditures during my investigation of the Edward French matter. Expense account item 1, $95 airfare and incidentals between Hartford and Chicago, the home of Edward French's mother. There the story went about as follows. Edward French had left the States after the war and gone to the Malay States, where he managed a tea plantation, concentrating on sales to a buyer for the Jewel Tea Company. He'd married an English girl, and life seemed pleasant enough, but a letter from a Constable Wicklow had reported the abrupt end of that. Edward, on a business trip to Singapore, had disappeared. The current crop of Malay guerrillas was suspected, but there was not one clue as to whether he was alive or dead. Expense account item 3, $1,283 airfare to Singapore. It was almost a week later that I jostled my way through the crowded streets to the office of the Jewel tea buyer, Mr. Neeps.
You know, it's odd, Mr. Dollar. You won't believe this, but I was thinking of Ed just as you walked through that door.
You knew about the disappearance?
Oh, yes. Constable from Raoub sent word down a week after he'd been here.
Oh, Mr. French did come here after he left his plantation.
Yes, we finished our business in the afternoon and went to dinner at the club that night. He left the following morning.
Did you hear from him the following morning?
Well, no, but I knew that was his plan. Actually, I wasn't worried about him even after I heard about it. Ed's, not peculiar, I guess, but strong-willed. If 50 men told him not to swim across a river, he'd do it just to please himself. You get to expect the unexpected from him. I don't know if I make myself clear.
I think I understand.
Selfish may be a better word. What I mean is that it would be like Ed to suddenly leave for some place without bothering to tell anyone.
Not even his wife?
Well, first of all, not his wife. Now, don't misunderstand. I like Ed, but I can't help disapproving of some of the things, like the way he treats Catherine. But none of my business. I like him in spite of those things. I think Ed will show up when he gets ready to and laugh at the trouble he's caused.
You don't put any stock in the idea that the guerrillas might have got him, huh? Bandits, I understand you call them.
Yes. Well, of course, there's always that possibility. A planter is killed now and then, but I'd expect Ed to be the last one.
If he just took off someplace as you suspect, would you have an idea where he'd go?
No, I'm afraid I wouldn't. It's a big world, you know.
Yeah. How do I get to Raoub? I began to appreciate the state of siege British Malaya is living under when I boarded the train the next morning. All the windows in all the cars were covered with wood, hard and thick enough to withstand fair-sized bullets. At the stopping point near Raoub, I was met by 2 native policemen armed with Bren guns who drove me the rest of the way in a jeep that had been encased in armor. There was no trouble, but by the time I reached the police station in Raoub, I had a healthy respect for the dank wall of jungle that pushed in from all sides and the unseen enemy it hid. Because on the way, I was notified by the native driver that Constable Wicklow had been killed from ambush the day before. His replacement was Constable Downs.
It's a nasty business, cleaning them out. Poor Wicklow'd been at it for almost a year.
Oh, it must have happened after I talked to the police in Singapore.
Yes, last night. They attacked the Stewart estate. That adjoins French's. Wicklow was killed on the way out with reinforcements. They'll single out the leader every chance they get.
What do you know about French's disappearance?
Very little, I'm afraid. I read Wicklow's report when I learned you were coming. Undoubtedly the work of the bandits, although it might appear to be kidnapping.
Kidnapping? That's a new theory.
Oh, hardly a theory yet. But it's not been their habit to conceal the bodies of their victims. This is the first case on record where a vehicle has been taken.
I didn't know about that either.
That's what Wicklow's report said. That's all I know about it.
Constable, I want to go out and talk with his wife. How do you...
Take the Jeep by all means. It's rather late in the afternoon to start out. If you can't be sure of getting back here before dark, well, there's hardly any possibility that you'll take a chance. The native boys simply won't start back. They'll stay behind the barricade there for the night, and so will you.
The French estate, like the others, maintained about 50 private soldiers who held defensive positions about the place 24 hours a day. By the time I got there, they had pulled in for the night and were manning a tight perimeter around the main house. As the Jeep passed through it, I saw that they were fairly well armed with rifles, light automatic weapons, and grenades. In sight of all this, waiting on the veranda, and dressed as though she were about to leave for a cocktail party, Mrs. French looked entirely out of place. Mrs. French?
Yes?
Oh, didn't Constable Downs telephone about my coming? He said he would.
Constable Downs? I'm afraid he wasn't able to. Our telephone wires have been out.
Oh. Well, my name is Dollar, Mrs. French.
How do you do?
I'm here from the States to investigate the disappearance of your husband.
The United States? I don't understand.
I was sent by the insurance company that carries the policy on his life. It's quite a big policy, you know.
Yes. Please sit down.
Thank you.
Mr. Dollar, you must understand what our fears are. That Edward has been killed by the bandits.
There's no proof of that yet. As a matter of fact, Constable Downs seems to think there's a fair possibility that he hasn't been.
What did he say?
That they never bother to hide anyone they've killed, and your husband's body hasn't been found. Also that they never steal cars, and your husband's car hasn't been found.
I haven't dared to hope. What does he think it means?
I don't think he's sure, but he mentioned kidnapping. I didn't know until I talked to him that your husband had been in his car when he disappeared. Does that mean that he drove to Singapore?
Yes, he always drove.
Through more than 200 miles of jungle during an emergency like this? Why would he do that?
Because everybody told him that he shouldn't. My husband was like that.
You're convinced that he's dead, aren't you?
Well, I haven't dared to hope. I've thought the worst so that it...
Mrs. French.
Oh, where did it come from?
It's hard to tell. That way, I thought. Now, you'd better sit down, Mrs. French. Come on. Come on, sit down. About 15 minutes later, I thought I understood her violent reaction to the shots in the far distance. A small lorry pulled up in front of the house, and a blond man of 30 or so years got out of it. He was introduced to me as Keith Stewart, manager of the adjoining estate. From one brief look that passed between Mrs. French and him, I thought I understood who she had been afraid for.
Well, I dare say that nobody would travel all the way out here if I caught it. You Americans are a surprising lot.
Yes, I suppose so.
And by the way, I very